Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and it's a big one today. I'm going to be reviewing the sophomore album from Eden, No Future. Mr. Jonathan Ng, the mastermind, producer, performer, vocalist, songwriter, started out quite a while ago at this point making EDM beats on his family computer, eventually releasing music as the Eden Project, doing both productions and top lines for other producers, eventually moving into a more self-produced, vocal-driven, R&B influenced direction in late 2014, early 2015 with the coming of his Bipolar Paradise EP, and further breaking out later in 2015 with his transition to Eden with the End Credits EP, and from there his popularity only snowballing with releases like I Think You Think Too Much of Me, all culminating in 2018 with the release of Ng's first ever studio album, Vertigo, a project that, as a lot of you probably already know, I gave a very glowing review of. In my opinion, it's pretty much the epitome of DIY music production, with Ng really handling every single side of the album as well as, everything in between. Though Vertigo was quite a bit less in your face, a lot more toned back and reserved than some of Ng's previous projects, I found a lot of enjoyment in it, both in its more quiet storytelling moments as well as its big, musical, more experimental type tracks. As a longtime fan of his work at that point, the album to me really felt like this huge culmination of everything that came before it, making subtle references to the different stages of his career. It definitely rewarded listeners for being willing to look beyond the boundaries of the album, with enough substance to it to really keep me coming back again and again. Every single time I listen to this album, I find something new to enjoy, and God knows how many times I've listened to it at this point. However, it wasn't long after the release of Vertigo when I started picking up some of the breadcrumbs that Eden was laying out, pointing toward his next phase. First, it was him and his band playing the heavily Flume-influenced Stutter on the Vertigo World Tour. Second, being able to chat with him on that same day and him casually mentioning how he'd like to work with John Hopkins at some point in the future. Third, the running, tripping, falling video where he's sitting on the ground at a subway station, playing with an analog synth and singing over it. And lastly, the single 909, which obviously references the Roland TR-909 drum machine. The song starting out just like a cut from Vertigo with the heavy use of cello, and then eventually transitioning into a more analog electronic type of sound. The moment I heard that song, my brain made the connection to Kendrick Lamar's The Heart Part 4, which in my mind kind of transitioned Kendrick's sound from To Pimp a Butterfly to Damn. I pretty much figured that Eden was doing the same thing with 909, and now that the full No Future album is finally here, I would say I was right. No Future sonically sees Eden's career pretty much come full circle, with him diving into his electronic roots. Of course, though, in a very different direction than the early Eden Project stuff. I definitely wouldn't compare No Future to, Time Changes Everything. However, I feel like this album is significantly closer to that sound than Vertigo was. I mean, I feel like Vertigo in large part was him just running away from his roots as far as he could possibly go, and with this album I feel like he's leaning into it a little bit more. It's like he finally realized he could make electronic music without sounding totally formulaic, and for the most part I feel like this change in direction, this shift back toward electronic music, does serve him pretty well. I feel like the analog and modular synths across this album, as well as the drum machines, really add a new layer to Eden's music that we haven't really seen before, or at least not in this more emo R&B kind of style he's been chasing the last few years. And in general, the style that he pursues on this album, with his ethereal vocals being paired with these rocky guitars and backed up by these drum machines and analog synths, isn't really something that I've heard before. Really, the closest I'd compare it to is the first couple James Blake albums. However, I do feel that Eden could have used a little bit more time to develop this sound, because the end result of this album to me is honestly kind of messy. I mean, this album came out only 2 years after Vertigo and only a year and a half after his last EP. Of course, there was about a year and a half between the releases of I Think You Think Too Much of Me and Vertigo, but keep in mind that in that time he wasn't really working on any other music, and he also didn't tour I Think You Think Too Much of Me for like a year straight. Also, some of the ideas on Vertigo date back even farther than the Eden alias, so it makes sense that that album was able to be put together in a rather timely manner. No Future, on the other hand, is bigger, more ambitious, and definitely a more drastic change in direction for Eden, so you'd think he would have had to put a lot more time into it, and perhaps he did. I honestly can't predict how many hours he put into this project compared to Vertigo, but if I had to guess, I would probably say it's less, because this album sounds significantly more messy and rushed than any of his former projects. Now, I don't want to get off on the wrong foot here and upset you guys. I don't think No Future is a bad album by any stretch. In fact, I think it's good. Very good, even. Is it pretty flawed, though? I would honestly say yes, and that's part of the cost of creating something different on such a large scale. As I said before, this album feels kind of messy to me, and I mean, Vertigo was lengthy too, at 52 minutes, but it had that kind of coming-of-age story at the center of all of it. Kind of felt like we were listening to Eden's entire life play out, and it was relatable, whereas No Future is even longer and doesn't really feel like it has that much of a concept or story tying it together. It feels like the main thread between every single song is that sonic influence with the analog synths, and just that, though cool as it is not honestly enough to keep my attention locked for 57 minutes straight. Within several listens of this album, really the only thing conceptually I could find that ties it together is that the beginning and the end kind of mirror each other. The album starts off with Good Morning, a song that sees Ing putting himself in his 16-year-old self's shoes, remembering not having the guts to leave. The song has a very bright and hopeful feel to it, driven by those big synth chords backing it up, and then the song transitions into the interlude In, whose dialogue sample almost perfectly matches that of the album's final interlude, Out, and Untitled seems to be kind of the foil to Good Morning, with Ing saying, I couldn't wait to leave that town. The song is a lot more depressive and heartbreaking, definitely feels opposite to Good Morning, which I think is its purpose here. However, beyond that, there's really not much I could find. None of the other songs seem to mirror each other in any capacity, and everything just kind of feels a bit scattered. The lyrics, which are one of the things that I normally really love about Eden's music, feel more like an afterthought in this project than a driving force. On several of these songs, it feels like Ing is jumping back and forth between different lyrical themes with not much rhyme or reason to them. On top of that, a lot of the songs in this middle section just either aren't super compelling or don't do enough interesting things sonically to really maintain my interest. I honestly could have done without How to Sleep, So Far So Good, and Tides completely. There's nothing interesting enough about those three songs that really would have made me miss them if they were taken off the album. And then songs like Static and Streams, I can't say I would miss all that much either if they were removed from the album, but in their defense, at least they have one or two elements that make them stand out. Static being a little bit more lo-fi influenced, though I feel like the song comes in at kind of a weird place and isn't really long enough to make a significant impact on the album. Streams is cool because the snare in the song is like the Mac error sound. But beyond that, I kind of feel like the song was a missed opportunity. I mean, it's streams spelled with like the $sign, so I imagine this song kind of being this, I guess, commentary on like Spotify and streaming culture, like maybe the negative effects that it's had on him or maybe the positive ones. However, beyond those songs, I feel like there is still a very solid 14 tracks here. Good Morning is a very solid introduction to the album. Much like Wrong, it showcases Ing doing some vocal harmonies, but this time being very quick to point out that the album isn't going to be so dry and organic as Vertigo, with those like big synth chords kicking off the song. Hertz is a really cool cut and one of my personal favorites from the album. I really like those kind of drunk, drowsy vocals that Eden has on the song. Touchdown, Giant Leap, Heartbreak, Godspeed. And then, of course, contrasting that with a chorus that's of a much brighter tone. Projector is probably my favorite song on the entire album. It's got some great vocal melodies, and I think it does a really good job of showcasing Ingolf in his more low vocal register. The song feels dark yet colorful at the same time, driven by those analog synth chords. I also really like the vocal effects that Eden uses on this song. I feel like it's some kind of gate that like cuts off his transients. You can only hear like the center of each word when he's singing it. I also think it samples that drum machine from 909, or maybe it's vice versa. Maybe this song was written first. But no matter the case, I feel like that was a nice touch that helps connect Vertigo to this album. There's also a little sample of the anime Kimi no Nawa, which I thought was another nice touch. Love, Death, Distraction is definitely the cut from this album that I feel is the most sonically similar to Vertigo. A lot of really depressive guitar in this song. The vocals are very vulnerable, and it sounds like he recorded the vocal line twice and then just like layered them together, which honestly sounds a little bit wacky, but I think in certain points of the song it works really well, especially when he's singing, you know, something different in both of them. The song seems to be about the harmfulness of social media, how we're just constantly chasing that higher high, trying to get as much dopamine as we can with those likes pouring in. Calm Down is another interesting one. It almost sounds like it should be the intro into something much bigger. The synths are pretty regular, yet the vocals over them are somewhat irregular, and right as the song starts to crescendo and get bigger and feel like it's building into something huge, it just like cuts off, which more than anything I feel like is just a funny little detail. I'm not upset by it or anything like that. Just Saying is another notable cut in my book. I think it does a really good job balancing between a super disorienting like IDM influenced beat and like more softer acoustic sections. The song also features one of my favorite lines on the album: "I'll get right in a little bit, I'll find my light in the little bits." The song can be a little bit all over the place, and in that way I think it's a great representation of the album as a whole, because like later in the song the pitch like rolls up for no reason and the song stops, and then it breaks into like this little kind of campfire sing-along type section, which was super strange for me. FOMO, though not my absolute favorite on the album by any stretch, I think is a good cut nonetheless. One of my highlights of the song is this section where Ing does a call and response and he does both of the vocals. Somewhat reminds me of Elohim and Yoshi Flower's Panic Attacks that came out a couple years ago. And then also the song features one of my favorite uses of a synth on the entire album. It's subtle but powerful. Isohel or isohel, I'm not entirely sure how that's supposed to be pronounced, is another cut from the album that sounds more similar to Eden's older stuff. It's more kind of singer-songwriter-esque, except this time those elements are backed up by some like crazy sounding high-pitched analog synths that sound like they could have come straight out of like a Sophie song. I also like how the backing vocals on this song will occasionally say a different line than the lead vocal. Kind of gives me an excuse to dig into the lyrics a little bit more, but I think overall it was a good touch. And then I really enjoy the section that Ing does in French toward toward the end of the song, even featuring a little bit of French wordplay, contrasting brilliant with brillant. There's a song called question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark, and fittingly, it's one of the wackier cuts on the entire album. It's driven by this guitar that sounds like it's straight out of like an old school rock song, but then with all these like wacky, wild synths coming out left and right. Some of my favorite lines on this album come on this song as well. He talks about driving drunk and speaking to God. He goes a little bit more into this like social media craze with the line daydreamer, hashtag goals screenshotted. Rushing at just over 5 minutes is the longest song on the album, but sadly for a majority of the song doesn't really feel like it's doing all that much. It's basically just like atmosphere, keys, vocals, and guitar, but then it eventually does build up with a really good payoff. The last couple minutes of the song are absolutely stunning with these massive, like stadium-sized drums, this like post-rock guitar rhythm, and then eventually breaking into this really great like 70s style guitar solo. The song starts to die out, eventually just being reduced to like an analog drum machine toward the end of the track, but it leaves you kind of wanting more. 2020 is kind of bittersweet, like it's a love song that's also longing for something in the past. There's a lot of really sweet, cute lyrics on the song, like she says I'm no good with my hands, but I held up the whole sky for her, and I would have caused so much trouble if I'd had you to sneak out with me. The crash vocal comes back on this song, which I honestly thought was a great touch. Good to get that kind of reference to Vertigo, and a feature that was used on a couple of my favorite tunes from Vertigo, Crash, of course, and Forever Over. And then Untitled makes a really good closer for the album. Like I already mentioned, it's pretty reserved and kind of depressive, but it also has a tinge of hope to it, as the song is centered around this sample of some Jamaican children singing Linstead Market, and it's just so cute. Also, when he sings All You Wanted Was Some Violent Form of Love, he uses the little love snippet from the Vertigo crowd, the same, sample he used on Love, Not Wrong, Brave, which is another really cool touch that I feel like helps connect this album to Vertigo in a really creative way. So yeah, there are a lot of really great ideas on this album. I just think the execution overall is a little bit messy. I think it definitely could have been condensed down to like maybe even 12 or 13 tracks and made a much better product. Overall, I'm definitely not opposed to Eden going in this direction with his music. I just think it's going to take a couple more years to really perfect. There are some really great moments on this album, some super unique ones. Unfortunately, there are also several really forgettable ones too. Unfortunately, there's nothing on this album that stands out to me quite as much as a Start End or a Forever Over or a Crash, but I am very much looking forward to seeing how these songs translate into a live context on his upcoming tour. I'm probably going to be attending a couple different dates. While admittedly the LP did fall a little bit short of my expectations, I still think it's a really good project, and I've still got so much love for this guy. And beyond that, this album definitely leaves me with excitement for how he's going to move forward, what direction he's going to go in next, if it's the same or if it's something completely different. For No Future, I am feeling a light 8 out of 10. As always, if you guys haven't listened to this album yet and you'd like to, I have the Spotify link down in the description below. And if you have listened to the album already, make sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. If you're new to the channel and you want to see more content like this, make sure to consider hitting the subscribe button. And if you enjoyed the video, as always, make sure to leave a like. Anyway, I'm Landon Remixes, I'm tired of talking, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.